Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 355 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is Ona Clark, a neurodivergent counsellor, advocate, campaigner and podcaster. In this episode, we'll explore the cost of caring, a powerful and thought-provoking topic that delves into Ona's personal motivation and journey, as well as the hidden financial and emotional costs of becoming a counsellor. Ona also discusses the broader role of social policy and how counsellors from underrepresented groups navigate the often challenging path to become qualified professionals in our field. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 355 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Oakes, my colleague, and myself, Ken Kelly, taking you through 3 stops on today's journey where we start off with ethical, sustainable practice. Today, we're diving into the importance of a clinical will, and we've got a really good handout that is going to be super useful on that topic for you. And if you do already have a clinical will, listen to this because there have been some changes and they may be worth noting. Then right into Practice Matters, which Rory has beautifully teed up his chat with Ona Clark on the cost of caring. We then move on to student services. Yes, we do see you, students, on your formal journey to become counsellors, psychotherapists, or learn the skills that you can use in other parts of your life. And today we're going to be speaking about client desires, therapist boundaries, erotic, transference, explored. Rory, just as I'm reading this out, I can see the YouTube flags going up here because we put our content out of a podcast, and it depends how you listen to it, but we also put out our podcast on YouTube as well. And I know from time to time we have them taken down where they say you can't talk about that. So be sure to listen to this one is what I'm saying. But let's start off the ethical sustainable practice, the importance of clinical will. And I start as I always do, Rory. I assume I know nothing. Well, maybe you don't have to assume. I'm in a good mood this morning. Assume I know nothing and explain to me what is a clinical will. I don't understand.
Well, first of all, like your Aristotelian positioning, Aristotle, the famous philosopher, said, "I know nothing," and then went on to learn every day, which is a great place to start from. But to answer your question, why we should have a clinical will, it's because it's part of being a 21st century therapist. We've talked a lot about being a 21st century therapist, and what that means is that we are now working within the sensibilities, the laws, the expectations from clients in the 21st century. And a clinical will effectively is a continuity of care. Now, no one likes talking about the thought that they might die. No one likes to talk about the fact they may be incapacitated. But the truth of the matter is we all eventually do die, and it's possible we could become incapacitated. And think about this. You're a client sat at home in between your sessions, And all of a sudden, someone phones up and they're very tearful and they say, I'm very sorry, but my partner has just died. I'm their partner, and I know that you're one of their clients, and I'm afraid I won't be able to see you anymore. And then they go off and cry a bit more, and then they put the phone down. Now, obviously, for the person who's left behind when someone dies or someone's incapacitated, it's terrible. But from the client perspective, could you imagine receiving a phone call like that? And I have to tell you, in my research and conversations, this has happened. This has happened. So it's very important that as practitioners in the service of ethical and sustainable practice, we have a clinical will. And it ensures that in event of sudden illness, incapacity or death, your clients are treated with care and professionalism, and it allows a nominated colleague to inform them and manage the records securely, maintain confidentiality, fulfill legal obligations, and also maybe refer them or for a period of time, if they're a qualified colleague, work with them until they can move on to another therapist. And tellingly, ethical frameworks now, be it the BACP or the NCPS, are clearly saying that you should have a clinical will. It's not really longer. It would be a case of it would be nice if we had one, or maybe you should think about it. It is a we should statement. We should have a clinical will.
Beautifully introduced, Rory. Thank you very much for that. Yes, we should have a clinical will. And if you think about it, a clinical will is, by the definition that it is a will, it is a legal document. And rightly so. You introduced this topic, Rory, speaking about the partner of the counsellor who, in this instance, in your scenario, had passed away, and that partner going through a list of maybe contacts and identifying people. That would be if those contacts were readily available. If those contacts were behind a sign-in, perhaps in a practice management piece of software, then that client may just sit there and just never hear again. Or they might arrive for their next session and nobody's there, and they don't know why. So having that continuity of care, as you've beautifully put it, Rory, is so, so important. And it's important also that that continuity of care sits in the hands of somebody who understands counselling, psychotherapy, confidentiality, data protection, all that we hold sacred as counsellors, the way that we interact and keep our clients' data secure for confidentiality, and of course compliance to data protection laws. And if I look in my own family members don't have that level of understanding or skill set, even though I've been in counselling world for a long time now, and I don't expect them to. And why should they understand it? So a clinical will, much like a will where you leave or bequeath your property or what you have to another person, it's the same kind of idea. What you're saying is, in the event of me not being able to anymore for death or incapacitation, that X person will be the point of contact, and they can have access to my client's list and my client's data, that this person X, also understands confidentiality and data protection and will hold this journey for this client, deliver the information and help hand that person off, or at least smoothen their journey. And it goes a little bit further than that as well, because with each one of those clients, there may be an assessment form, there may be professional letters from other agencies or other professionals that you're holding. There may be notes that you have collected on this person. In other words, their data and their information. And that can be however you choose to store that information. It might be on a password protected drive. It might be within an application that you pay for that stores this information securely. And you would bequeath or hand over a way for the person, the person who you choose as the executor, to be able to access those records. So if it was a password protected drive, they might have your password in the will. And I must say, though, the will only be opened by that person in the event of your death. You would, of course, put it together, let them know that you have nominated them, but they wouldn't be reading over it, seeing that password now. They would only have the information when it is relevant. So you've said why it matters. It protects our clients, fulfills the ethical duties. It is compliance with the law, and that's important because we are holding people's data, and puts those clearer next steps over. So what are the things, Rory, that we should consider placing in a clinical will? Because there's a lot to consider here, Rory.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So I think the first thing is choosing an executor. So someone who is going to take care of business. So if something happened, your loved one would be able to contact the executor, maybe a peer, could be a supervisor, and say, look, this has happened, and the clinical will's been left and you've been nominated. And I think it's really important that an executor of a will needs to know their executor. This needs to be agreed beforehand. And I would also say there's could be quite a lot of work involved in this. So you may want to think about a fee for people to do this work, certainly if they're a professional therapist, because it will take a little bit of their time initially. So first things first, choose a professional peer who understands ethical and confidentiality requirements, and they should agree in writing to act on your behalf. So this isn't just a bit of a chat over the phone. This is a very formal process where they agree to be the executor, to take care of making things like making contacts with clients, looking at contact information records, accessing your appointment systems, your emails, even your mobile phone, thinking about ongoing sessions. If you've got a big client group, how is that going to be managed? How's that going to be managed going forward? How are they going to be allocated another therapist, or how are they going to be supportive? Because for some, the therapist-client relationship is a very nuanced one, and some may just feel abandoned. Some clients may feel abandoned. So working with that, and also where things are stored. So very clear where your data is stored, and how it should be destroyed or transferred securely, and also how long records should be kept. Because here's the thing: even though someone is not available, they die, or they're incapacitated, clients have the right to access their records. They may want it for things like legal cases. So it may be that the records have to be kept by somebody else for the duration of the contract that you've agreed. So this isn't just 5-minute thinking about, I'll just ask my friend to do it for me. This is a real piece of work that needs to be undertaken. And I would say, collaboratively with whoever you choose and they agree to, and also I think your supervisor. I think this is really one that sits with supervision, Ken.
Yeah, very much so. And even if you choose maybe a trusted peer to be the executor of that clinical will, you'd still want to be briefing your supervisor on who that person is and their contact details, so that the circle is complete, that everybody knows where what part they play in this. And we were talking about what you might put into that clinical will, and you've mentioned supervisor twice, Rory, and quite rightly so, and we've just amplified that. That's a good place to work out what should go in your clinical will. If you sit down and say, I'd like to use some of today's supervision session to go over and review my clinical will, or if you don't have one, to set up a clinical will, you and your supervisor should be able to work through that. Whether your supervisor ends up being the executor or not of that will. That's a great place to put it. And just one thing I'd like to add, Rory, to the very comprehensive list of things that you might include in that clinical will is just one more. And it's instructions regarding your formalities and paperwork around your practice. And that would include your membership with your ethical body. It would it would cover things like your insurer. Who are you insured with? Because that all would obviously change, and somebody needs to pick up that and kind of communicate that information. Any contracts that you may hold, you may have a contract with an EAP or another organisation, so that the right people are contacted. We were speaking earlier about the impact on the client, but I think that as counsellors, psychotherapists, we need to think about the impact on our loved ones as well. They will be going through their process and mourning. The last thing they need to, the last thing you would want for them is to be tied up in what do I do here, and them looking around trying to seek advice. And this, I think, is really important, specifically perhaps if you practice from a room within your own home or in your garden. I know many do, and it's a great way to practice. But the last thing a grieving partner needs is somebody knocking on the door, asking for the person who is no longer there. So it's really I'm just going to go back to what you said, Rory. This was a nice thing that you kind of thought, and it was belt and braces before. But now we should be doing this. We really, really should be doing this. So I think that choosing a clinical executor is a really important point here, Rory. And we want to select somebody that we can trust, but we want to make sure that they are suitably qualified. We would want to make sure that they are a member of a professional body. It doesn't have to be the same professional body that you might be a member of, but they need to be a member of a professional body to understand and, I guess, to hold the same duty of care over the information that they may get. And I think really, understands the confidentiality and the ethical challenges around how this may play out. And most importantly, I think this is why you put the fee in there, Rory, because it is not uncommon to pay a fee of some kind to the person who is the executor, because there's a significant amount of work that they might need to do to roll this out. So making sure that the person is really willing to act, that they really signed up. So it's not just oh yeah, don't worry about it, I would take care of that if that happened to you, that it is formal. And that's why a clinical will is a document it's a legal document. It's going to be signed. It's going to have really important information in it. So as we kind of look at past that choosing of the clinical executor, Rory, what do we need to consider regards that ethical and the legal aspects of this process?
Well, first of all, I would suggest that in your contracts, you state you've got a clinical will, and explain that to the clients, and explain who may be who you've nominated. And that takes any surprise out of the process. I mean, it would be shocking enough to receive a phone call from a qualified practitioner to say that you weren't around anymore, having to tell the client you weren't around anymore. But forewarned is forearmed, as I like to say. I was like, we in Counselling Tutor often say, we hope for the best and we plan for the worst. So really put it into make sure it's into your contract, and also make sure your loved ones understand what the clinical will is. Who's going to be administering it. What you don't want is someone turning up at the door and saying, "No, I'm Rory, and I've come to, I'm very sorry for your loss, and I've come to administer the clinical will," and the loved ones left behind don't know anything about it. So you're going to have to tell your loved ones or your next of kin, as it's sometimes referred to legally. So I think those are two things. You've mentioned the insurance company. You mentioned the supervisor, Ken. Two very important aspects. So those are the areas that I would think would be the most important. You may want to tell your insurer, and I don't think you need to tell your professional body, because I don't think they have a system to be able to
No.
work with that information. But certainly run it past your insurer, because that's you have insurance, and part of having insurance is appraising them of anything that may affect any claim in the future. So I think a conversation with your insurer, it's
Yes.
it's a big piece of work. And what I can say, Ken, I've been the executor of a will, not a clinical will, the executor of will, and it was a massive piece of work. And it lasted about 18 months to 2 years.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yeah. Mine was a relative who died, but I could see it being quite a big piece of work in terms of a clinical will, because it needs to be handled sensitively, and there's a lot of moving parts to it, as we've explained, and you need someone who can work with all the moving parts, sometimes I think at the same time.
Indeed. So I guess it leads on to, how do you create a clinical will? With it being a legal document, we just always put in that this is not legal advice. It really isn't. Rory and I are two colleagues having a discussion about this all-important topic. It is for you to research, and each one of us bear that to find the right information to put into our clinical will. But we'll run over some of the areas. You're going to have your details as the practitioner, who you are. So it's the clinical will for, and you would put in your name, your practice name, your home address, how to get hold of you, and multiple ways to be able to contact and get hold of you. And then there are two areas. The one is the clinical will initiator, and we've already spoken about the clinical executor. So the clinical executor is the person who will carry out your wishes. They're the person that you put your wishes. This is my password. These are my clients. This is how you manage that. This is how long the documents have been kept for. All of that information. That is the executor. They are executing and doing that work. But the initiator doesn't have to be the executor. So let's say, for instance, I did not use my supervisor as my executor. I might use my supervisor as my initiator. Now, what is the difference? Well, the difference is the initiator is the person who activates it, or goes, okay, this has now happened. Let me make sure that the executor gets the document and the information they need in their hand. Current supervisor, really good choice for this. Even if they are the executor as well. And the reason I say that is, I spoke earlier about if something happened in my family, that they don't have a knowledge and understanding of counselling to be able to make the right decisions. But they know who my supervisor is because I go there once a month, and they know their name and they know their contact details because I speak about, I've got to go to supervision, I've got to go da. So they're usually a logical, easy to contact person on that list. So when you do go into the executor, and you may have more than one executor, and I think that's really important. You may select person A, but you must also have a backup of person B as well, just to be doubly sure. You're going to put in their name, their job title, their address, phone number, email, so that you want them to be contactable, and then authority granted, making explicit what that is. Might be putting there closing of my practice, managing any communications, delegate to appropriate individuals where necessary, a handover of your clients. You might have thoughts around that as well. And then I think what's really important, is so easy to forget, and this is not just with a clinical will, with any will, is where is it? Where do you keep it? It's all good and well having a clinical will stuck in some filing cabinet somewhere that nobody can ever find. So the location, where is it? It needs to, the executor needs to have those details to be able to get it, read it, because they won't be reading it beforehand because it contains confidential information, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think people who execute wills, or executors as they're known, need to be thoughtful about how the will is activated. So I think you're absolutely right. The initiator is somebody who would just phone up the person dealing with it and saying, look, this has happened. I know there's a clinical will. I wonder if you could, come over to my place and have a look. I mean, it will almost certainly involve either someone visiting you or where you lived, or you may very well want to kind of forward think this and maybe have your information on a practice management piece of software where the password can be shared so someone can just log in with your password. So that needs to be thought through. And there's quite a few things that I think we need to think about. How long to retain records for? So an executor might have to think that if your contract says 7 years, it's usually 7 years. But it might be that if you're working for an EAP or you're working for an organisation, they may want the records stored longer. So as part of being an executor, you may have to take on the storage of those records, so that if anybody makes contact and say, look, I want to have a court case. I had therapy 5 years ago, and I believe that I need to access my records. The executor would need to keep those records to be able to supply them to the client. So the emphasis, I think, is you need a lot of detail now in your practice. You're going to need names, addresses, phone numbers, all those details. So someone, when you're not there, just think about what would happen if you're not there. And you need to kind of document all those steps so someone can easily find your information. Yeah. And just things like cancelling subscriptions, things like professional bodies, things like your insurance, things like any CPD you've signed up to. All those things may need to be cancelled. So there is a lot to it, and I'm sure there's a lot of people are going to be listening to this going, oh my goodness, this is a big piece of work. And the answer to you, it is a big piece of work. And I would say, if you haven't got one, start today. Don't hesitate. Don't put it off, because you never know what the future brings. None of us do. And it's going to make life so much easier for your loved ones, and indeed, for your clients, if you have a well-written, well-executed clinical will.
Ah, beautifully said, Rory. With the clients and records, always remember to put in where they are, not just go through my client's records, because we know, I know they're in that locked filing cabinet over there. Of course I know. So, it's that frame of referencing. Just give out those details. And with you speaking about that, we need to collect people's details, their names, their addresses, contact numbers, which we do anyway as counsellors, psychotherapists. But every now and again, we see a question that says, do I really need to register with the ICO? And this is just another underlining of, yes, you do. The thing is, as counsellors, psychotherapists, we are handling something that is very, very sensitive. Now, sadly, the most traded commodity in the world that is worth more than gold, oil, or anything else is now data. It's people's data. And it is exploited, and it is used in ways that maybe are not in service of people. So if we're holding clients' data and those records, we need to ensure that it remains held in the same way as you would hold it yourself, and your clinical will is going to ensure that and protect those clients that you have so faithfully served. Access to your devices, all of your accounts, they will need, like you've said, Rory, those memberships and subscriptions. And then, of course, you're going to sign it. You're going to sign it. You're going to date it. There's going to be a witness that is going to sign that as well, if you choose to. And then you will put that in a place, share it with whoever it needs to be shared with, and usually that the handover document, when on execution, would be in a sealed envelope that would have all your wishes in. Wow. Anything you wanted to add, Rory, other than I'll give the address in a moment of where they can get the download and overview of this so you can start having a look and think about your own clinical will. Any final thoughts, Rory?
Yeah, well, I don't want to be too parental, but I fear my next comment may come across like that. It's not a nice to have. It's now a ethical imperative. It's something that you would consider in the same brevity as supervision or having insurance or registering with the ICO. It is part and parcel of being a professional therapist in the 21st century. So if you haven't got one, if you haven't got a clinical will, make a start today. Sit down and make a start today and make a plan and get one in place because, as professionals, we have to act in the best service of our clients, even if we're not there. So make a start today. Get your clinical will in progress, and then you have peace of mind. And more to the point, your clients will have peace of mind because when you've made one, you're going to have to then inform your clients. So it finishes that circle, that professional circle off. So get on with it. Is what I'd say. You haven't got one.
Well, we've got some help for you. I'm going to give you the address for the download in a moment. I guess one final call out from me is if you are a clinical supervisor, this is a discussion you should be having with every single one of your supervisees and checking their status of their clinical will. I know in Counselling Tutor, we run a clinical supervision training course for counsellors, psychotherapists that want to take that next step in their career. And this is a topic that is dived into very, very deeply because it is so important. There it is, ethical, sustainable practice, the importance of the clinical will. If you would like to get the super duper handout, it's easy and it's free. You just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 355, that's today's episode, and you can download it. It's right there on the page. Just click and download it. And if you are maybe considering becoming a supervisor and you're interested in that extended role of what a supervisor might do, including suggesting clinical wills for supervisees, and you feel you're ready for that, Counselling Tutor have great training, really highly reviewed. Go and have a look at it. Just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on our products, and you'll see our supervision training course there. We have regular intakes on that supervision training course. And that is today's ethical, sustainable practice. And we move out of sustainable ethical practice into practice matters, because practice does matter. I think you'll all agree with me. And today it's the interview with Ona Clark. Rory, you met up to speak about the cost of caring.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that my guest today encapsulates what it is to speak out about things that are never really openly talked about. And that is the cost of counselling training, the cost of being in service to others, usually in terms of students, for no fee at all, and how we may have a more equitable system of supporting those who wish to serve their fellow human beings. So I was really happy to catch up with Ona Clark, an activist. I use the term with inverted commas, an activist, someone who really cares about making sure those on low incomes can access and be of service to their fellow humans, as well as those who are a little bit more financially well off. I caught up with her, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Today we're joined by Ona Clark, a neurodivergent counsellor, advocate, campaigner and podcaster who is empowering growth and well-being and widening access to counselling for Black women and underrepresented groups. She has talked about the cost of caring, covering personal motivation, the hidden costs of becoming a counsellor, practitioner well-being, representation, impact of policies, and indeed the future of the caring profession. So, Ona, it's just lovely to meet you today, and so I'm so interested in what you're going to have to say on this really important topic.
Oh my gosh, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. I remember being a student and, they was like, make sure you go to Counselling Tutor, make sure you get your research. And now I'm actually here. So it's like amazing to be on the programme. And thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm glad I just didn't send you to sleep. I should say Ken and myself didn't send you to sleep. So, Ona, what was a turning point or your personal experience that made you feel compelled to write The Cost of Caring? And can you talk a little bit about that writing?
Yeah. So, when I decided to train as a counsellor, it was obviously a personal choice. I came into the profession later on in life, and it was like, you have to consider the impact of studying is going to have on your home. So, I did my research and, I found that doing a course at college was more ideal for me. And so then I started training. But it's only when I started training that I realised, my goodness, the costs involved, the hidden costs involved. I was a single parent. I had children to look after. I'd taken a hit when it came to finances as well to do the course. And I just started to sort of wonder, if this is really difficult for me, what is it like for other people? What is it like for other diverse groups? And so what started out as being something very personal became me wanting to speak out more widely about this inaccessibility and training to be a counsellor. And I guess when I wrote the article in Counselling Matters, it was more about truth-telling, giving a voice to those silenced by financial strain, shame, or professional expectations, really. And I just wanted to highlight a problem to kind of inspire collective reflection and maybe a starting point for change within the profession. So it became personal. It was personal, but then it became more than just that when I realised the costs involved with training, to be honest. And it was really tough, really, really tough.
So for those of you who might be wondering what Counselling Matters is, that is the house magazine of the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, rather like the BACP's Therapy Today, a magazine. And it was a very, very powerful article, The Cost of Caring. I did read it, and I thought it was very powerful. And you spoke about the financial strain that trainees face. So how do these hidden costs shape who can and, I guess, can't enter the profession?
Well, let's just talk about some of the costs I was referring to. So, you have to pay tuition fees. So if you happen to be in a college that allows you to get funding, great. If not, it's a loan or it's self-funded. Okay. Understandable at the first hurdle. But then when you start thinking about personal therapy, so training requires you to have 60 hours, which is 30 hours a year of personal therapy. And that can be anything from £35 to £60 an hour. Now, for somebody on low income, and I was on low income and still considered to be on low income, or if you're claiming universal credit, you add up those costs, that's quite a bit. And then you think about your unpaid placement fees. If you're not in a placement, for example, which is a requirement of the course, 100 hours, you have to look for a placement. That placement may require you to travel. There is no funding or any support available for travel costs or even lunch or anything like that. If you happen to have supervision, which that you have to pay for, supervision is mandatory. Some placements give adequate supervision, others need to top up. And then you talk about your membership fees. As a student, you have to be part of the BACP membership fees. And just all of those things really impacted my ability to really focus in on the course. So, for example, I was constantly worrying about how I was going to make ends meet. And those things impact your ability to read as deeply as you want to and to enjoy, networking. I haven't even spoken about training as well. You've got to do some personal CPD. All of these costs, how are you supposed to do that without any funding? The funding I got at the time just covered the school fees. It did not cover anything else. And so I've often wondered, what is the emotional toll, the exhaustion, the guilt, the financial anxiety, the self-doubt that crept in, barely surviving? You don't want trainees to barely survive. You want them to thrive. So those financial pressures really impacted me. And I also wondered, from those coming from diverse backgrounds, working class people, single parent households, all of these diverse voices, how are they going to be able to access this course or this training with these kind of pressures at a time when we need diversity in the profession? Are we excluding these people because there isn't additional support?
Yeah, I absolutely hear that. And as someone from a working class background, I've often spoken on the podcast about my reflections on having beans on toast 3 times a week because we couldn't afford anything else. And what impact do you think that this kind of lack of funding, worry about money, to be blunt, has on the well-being of trainee therapists and indeed their longevity in the counselling profession long term?
Mental health, I considered that too. Life happens for all of us, not because we're counsellors or therapists that we don't have life happening. And actually, when I was training, I was going through, I just had a divorce. So it's a massive, major change in life. So I feel like the mental health impacts you. But when you've got financial pressure, that's just something else. So I guess we have to acknowledge, the emotional weight of others while managing our own unresolved trauma. We are being asked to work with people in very, very vulnerable positions. Normally, they are in situations that they're in crisis sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. And so we're struggling with all those training things, and yet we're still required to carry the weight of others while managing our own. I guess for me, it's like this profession says we need to practice self-care. But if we haven't got enough funds to do that, then how does that happen? And then you think about the emotional labour, the risk of burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma. So, yeah, and I guess, even now, I've qualified and, even doing therapy for me, who's qualified, it's expensive, enabling me to talk about issues that, I want to talk about. So mental health is massive. And I guess part of why I want to talk about this is to highlight that we need some type of subsidy, for therapy, for counsellors, for trainees, some type of subsidy to help us look after our mental health and well-being. Because if you're not flourishing in this profession or you haven't quite made it, then how are you supposed to do that?
Absolutely. And I think, you've highlighted the plight of, low paid therapists or people who may be, in receipt of benefits. But, we all heard, or we should have heard, about minority stress, and you did highlight the kind of extra emotional labour faced by those in training from diverse backgrounds. What changes would you make in training and practice so that it was genuinely inclusive?
Do you mean that from the cost of caring campaign, or do you mean that as a black woman?
Well, I think any aspect that you want to discuss, to be honest, if you want to discuss the cost of caring, that's fine. But your own experience would be equally as interesting, I think.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, I also recently wrote an article in the BACP about being a trainee therapist and being a black woman within that concept, and the emotional labour of being one of a few, or having to constantly prove myself, and the, fatigue that comes from that was really, really tough. And so, when you are in the minority, I wasn't able necessarily to be vulnerable in the same way. And I had different struggles. There were many times, for example, when I didn't even eat during the day because things were really difficult. But for my peers who came from more affluent backgrounds, that was not even a consideration. I'd have to bring in lunch sometimes. So, I feel like, those were my experiences. And my hope is that in talking about these issues, that more can be done so that people don't have to go through those kind of experiences that I went through.
Yeah, and I heard two distinct things. One was your own experience of being a black female trainee in an area where you felt it would be difficult to maybe be yourself because you were a minority, and the other was the general issue regarding lack of resources. So maybe it's worth just expanding on the first point, which was what particular challenges faced you as a minority person in training. What was it that was I guess gave you that extra emotional labour?
Definitely my experience from being in a minority was a big experience. It impacted me more than I could have imagined. And the ability to not be able to use my voice or to speak about it or for it to be heard was very, very tough. So, and I guess that's why I wrote about it so powerfully in the BACP and then went on and did a podcast and went into more detail about the kinds of things that training could do to address those things. Because there was also a power imbalance, right? The fear of speaking out and the consequences of that was one area. The fact that there was a lot of annoyance about sitting with that uncomfortability and people also being scared as well of getting it wrong, and not really knowing what to do with these uncomfortable emotions and feelings, but they definitely were there and it was definitely very tough. I think the second biggest challenge after that was definitely finances. To be honest, I don't quite know how I did it, but my determination for doing this work saw me through, and I'm glad I did see it through. But I can imagine if finances are an issue, it could increase someone's ability to complete. The dropout rate might, I don't know what the data is, there are people probably more experienced than I am, but there were times when I thought, can I actually complete this and finish? Because the finances were just really tough.
Yeah, I mean that's something I can empathise with, the financial piece. There were times when I thought to myself, I'm gonna have to get myself a better paying job, which will stop me having the time to be able to attend classes and attend supervision and practice. But I guess what I'm hearing is that was part of the struggle. But a big part was the fact that being a minority was an extra. An extra burden, if you like, on you in
layer.
An extra layer. Yeah. Thank you. I think that's probably a better way of discussing it. Can you give us some insight into what held your voice back, or what were those rather difficult exchanges that you experienced? Because I think this is really where the learning is, isn't it?
True. A couple of things. So first of all, in terms of finances, there's a lot of shame about not being able to afford things. It's shameful. Nobody wants to go, oh, I haven't got any, can you get me a coffee? Or, you've got personal pride, right? So there's shame about how much you're really struggling. You don't want to make it obvious to people that you might seem like you're doing really well above the surface, but below your feet are crackling away trying to keep your head above the surface with bills and all of that. And just to add a little bit in there, I just wanted to go back and say that I did actually do some work. I couldn't balance the work with the responsibility of the course, so I had to get rid of the work, which then compounded my financial problems. So it's a bit of a difficult we say in therapy, two things can be completely different but true at the same time. That was the situation. And in terms of what held my voice back, being truly myself, being able to truly be vulnerable. And when I was myself, it was met with silence. We know the power of silence in the work that we do. Even in the silence, there is a conversation. It's not being said, but there's a conversation happening. Either I'm not happy with the fact that you're making me feel uncomfortable, or we don't want to deal with this right now. And I had to sit with that all the way through. So I could speak on comfortable, generic areas, but on the things that maybe were affecting me or I wanted to speak about more specifically, it was more challenging.
Sure. And would you be willing to share some of the things that you couldn't speak about, you felt attenuated about speaking about?
I think it would be, I need to be respectful and mindful. And there are some things I cannot speak about. They were just things that happened, and those that were there knew what that was about. But I think the easiest way to describe it is that I felt very disempowered as a Black woman in a space where there were not many like myself.
Sure. Yeah, very powerful, quite powerful, well, very powerful to hear. And, you know, I know that, I don't know if you've heard my conversations with Sarah Henry, who's a Black therapist and trainer, and indeed now a colleague on the podcast. You know, she's often said that those conversations are not had because white people are just a bit too polite. White and polite is the is the term, because people are afraid of having conversations. Or is it an insensitivity that sometimes that people are just insensitive because they have no idea of your frame of reference?
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit in there to unpick. So in the first instance, I agree with you. It's an uncomfortable topic and people are scared to touch it because they don't want to get it wrong. Nobody wants to get in problems or be sued or be in any kind of hot water. So there is that genuine fear. I also think that it's also so emotively, it's a really emotive issue, because if you acknowledge that race is an issue, then what does that mean for you who isn't affected by it? What does it mean for you who isn't affected by it? What do you then do with that? Do you remain silent and keep the status quo, or is there a requirement for you to do a little part that you can do? And I guess that's where, if I was going to be, you know, have this conversation, that's where I would frame it. When you have to acknowledge that race disadvantages diverse communities, not just myself, then what then? And who's benefiting from that too? And do you want to do something about that and be uncomfortable with what that is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure that a lot of people listening to this will have pause for reflection, because it's a very powerful observation that you make. Moving on to maybe how we change that. If you had a room full of policymakers and you were addressing them, what would you say to them? What would you want them to hear about, you know, the cost of caring and its impact on mental health?
Well, I would say, given the fact that we are in a mental health crisis right now, there's no better a time for us to address these issues, so that we have a workforce that is not only mentally able, but mentally well to be able to cope with what we're seeing. I would say that we, as counsellors and therapists, we are part of the infrastructure, and we're not as supported as some of our colleagues, for example. I would ask for the government to help with funding for counselling training. For those that would want to come in but don't have the money and don't want to necessarily borrow money, I would ask for, you know, potential grants. And I would campaign to normalise seeking help and ensure that diversity in therapy is funded properly. One of the things I will say about that is that as I'm practicing right now, I have a lot of people coming through who are very diverse, males, people from different orientations, females, all kinds. But one thing that's coming through really clearly is the fact that some of them have said, we've sought you because we want someone who looks like us and understands us. I don't want to have a conversation and have to be explaining from a curious lens. When I say something, I want somebody to understand what I mean. Or, for example, they are saying that we've tried to go to other counsellors and we've had some very not great experiences and been impacted, actually, and that's not something that they want. So there is a need to help with access. And I would say that a profession that truly mirrors society leads to a better, more culturally sensitive care. And if we value mental health as a nation, we must invest in those who provide it.
Yes, well, very well said. And I also think that there is something about the frustration of minority clients having to educate the counsellor on their particular ethnicity or diversity. I heard you say quite clearly, it's someone who knows who that person is, someone like them. I think that's a very powerful statement. So if we look ahead, what does a more sustainable or collective ethical counselling profession look like?
Oh gosh. Although I am not an authority in this matter, and I think maybe your question is maybe reflected in what our collective responsibility could be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first of all, I feel like as counsellors, because we deal with so many different issues and we're at the forefront of working with people in crisis sometimes, I believe that we all have a responsibility to do what I'm doing. It isn't just about us seeing clients one-to-one, but actually what are we seeing? What's coming through? What are the voices? What are the general themes that are coming up? Just like I've shared with you with some diverse clients, this is what they're saying. I'm using my voice to amplify and advocate and campaign and get more support around this area. I guess it's reimagining counselling training as a partnership between ethics and economics, meaning valuing compassion, but also accessibility equally. And I guess that's what I can say. I mean, I haven't sat in this profession as long as you have, but I'm peering in and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking there's still quite a bit of work to do here.
Well, I think it's very useful that your voice and the work you're doing is pushing or informing or nudging, hopefully, that work that needs to be done. If you want to know more about Ona's work, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, hit the podcast tab, go to episode 355. We'll put some links in the show notes so you can see Ona's work and also see the article that she wrote and also a little bit more about her. And it just goes for me to say, Ona Clark, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. And can I just add quickly that if you believe in everything that we've discussed here today, there is a cost of caring campaign. Please go to change.org and sign the petition, because this is one of the ways that we can get our voices heard. And thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
And we'll put that link in the show notes as well. So Ona, thank you. Thank you very much.
Massive thank you to Ona Clark and to you, Rory, for bringing us the important discussions, and that is today's Practice Matters. We now move head first into Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting. And it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counsellingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, speaking about client desires, therapist boundaries, erotic transference, explained Rory. I'm intrigued. I almost feel like if I was listening to this episode, right at the top of the episode when this was announced, I'd be sticking through the podcast for this bit. What do we need to know? What do we need to know here?
Well, what we really need to know, Ken, is the question that was asked many years ago by a student who said to me quite directly, I remember she was sat right in front of me in the circle, and she said, Rory, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. What happens if my client fancies me? And I said, And what she was, of course, talking about was transference. And transference is certainly unconscious or redirected feelings, desires from an important past relationship that are then projected on to the therapist, or a desire that's projected onto the therapist. And I think it could be, certainly those who practice humanistic therapy, but all therapists may be included in this. When you're offering those facilitative conditions, you're being empathic, you're being non-judgmental, you are really listening and paying attention to the client. What happens is that sometimes clients see that as a romantic kind of gesture. And for some clients, they may kind of have a bit of a wish fulfillment. They may think, oh, my therapist's so lovely. So lovely. I'd love to date them. And what happens is that clients can sometimes drift in to fantasizing about their therapist being the ideal date. And well, that is, I would say, that's a nice, must be a nice feeling for them. As professionals, it can be a bit, it can rock us a bit when a client says, "Oh, I'd love to go out with a man like you," or "I'd love to have a girlfriend like you." It can rock you, because how do you respond to that? And that's the real issue of erotic transference, that the client is coming for something else. They're not coming for therapy. They're coming maybe to spend time with someone who they'd like to date, Ken.
Yes, it is that soil of a different kind, where a person is truly listened to with empathy, and we see that person, and it's irrespective of modality. And I know soil of a different kind relates to person-centered, but it really does span all of the different modalities. A person coming in, finally being heard. This person actually listens to me. This person actually really cares. And maybe they're having changes are happening within their life where they wow, this person, me being close to this person is really beneficial for me, almost like a talisman, as opposed to seeing it as therapy where they are progressing. So that is all shone onto the therapist, and that can be very seductive indeed, and it's understandable. And I remember taking I'll keep this very broad, this topic into my supervision, because I was shocked. I was deer in the headlights shocked. And it was interesting. It was normalized instantly, which was very, very helpful for me by my supervisor, who said, it's natural for humans that are in close contact, spending a lot of time together, to maybe form an attraction for that other person. There's naturalness in that. But I think this becomes this erotic transference when it is not that, when this person is projecting onto you the fix that they need, or seeing you not as the therapist but as something else, as you have so beautifully said, Rory. And this is nothing new, is it? It goes back to the man himself with his cigar, Mr. Sigmund Freud. I'm sure that's stereotyping. He'd be very cross about that. I think he's more than a cigar. But what do we learn from Sigmund Freud? Because he kind of pointed this out to us, Rory.
Yes, well, I mean, he was the person who named erotic transference, and there is a German name for it, which I'm not going to pronounce because I'll get it wrong. But he wrote about this, and he talked about this certainly between, in the early 1900s, 1912, 1915, and he observed that some of his patients, as he called them, developed romantic or sexual feelings for him during treatment. Now, I don't know, knowing Freud as I do, or his work and his life, I don't know how much of that was instigated by Freud, but we'll just leave it with he was the first person to identify it. And he did actually write a book, Observations on Transference Love, further recommendations on the technique of psychoanalysis. It wasn't a book, it was an essay, and he discussed patients' erotic feelings. And one of the things he came up with, or he believed, that it's not genuine love. So it's not love as we would know it, but it's rather a repetition of emotional patterns from childhood relationships. And now we are really moving into the dynamic realm where a lot of therapists, and I'd include myself in that, would believe that when we look for a partner, what we are looking for is patterns of love that were given to us by our caregiver. So, there's this old story about people marrying the parents. He's married his mother, or married the father, or whatever. But I do think there's some truth in that. I think that when we look, as humans, when we look for partners, we're replaying what was what we enjoyed about being parented, maybe the love or the closeness, and then we build that into a different relationship, a different form of love with a romantic or a sexual partner. And Freud was very clear. He thought that they should not be gratified. So in other words, he thought they shouldn't be reciprocated, although Freud did actually had an affair with one of his clients, so he wasn't the greatest role model for this, but he did think they should be understood as part of the therapeutic process. And I think that's exactly what your supervisor did. Your supervisor, when you went and you were rattled by it, Ken, your supervisor helped you understand that sometimes erotic or eroticized transference is part of the therapeutic process. It happens more often than we'd like to believe, I think.
Yeah. And just following on from that, it's about recognizing that, and rather than running from it, is actually working with that erotic transference so very safely just exploring that. What is that with that person? Now, how do we do this gently, Rory? Because I know that we're kind of treading on. There are certain modalities where this is very strong and it's kind of taught, but there are also modalities where it isn't taught at all. You need to learn about it in CPD. How do we gently explore and work with erotic transference without reinforcing that or being, complicit in that, Rory?
Well, I think we need to be very, very gentle in our explorations. And I think that any exploration should always focus on meaning. So I may say to the client, I hear what you're saying. I just wonder what this means to you, and try to get them to explore what it is, maybe even name the feelings. And in that, you may very well start to uncover something that was either missing or not completed in a previous relationship. I think to run away from it, and we are talking to students specifically here, Ken, I think it is very difficult, and I think this is one of those cases where you're going to need a bit more supervision. It's not.
Yeah,
I think you might find me to see your supervisor a bit more. So explore. Don't shy away from it. Don't go into the shadows and hope it'll pass, because it probably won't pass. Even if the client doesn't talk about it, it'll still be there. So just gently explore it and ask, okay, you've said that you find me attractive. Can you just tell me maybe a little bit more about, maybe is there someone in your past that I remind you of? And that's the key to unlocking transference, because transference is that time machine where someone is living a here and now relationship that is informed by the there and then. Yeah. So, and they might say, oh, well, I know when I was at school, I had a boyfriend or a girlfriend who looked like you, and they said those things. And I think gently you can help the client understand that was then and this is now. It's very tricky, and I think it's probably one of the most daunting explorations students can take, because students haven't got the history of practice behind them. It's one of those things that it's one of those bridges one has to cross as a trainee therapist. And once you've crossed it, you'll cross it many, many times again. But when you do cross it, it won't be as scary. And like any bridge, once you've crossed one, or you've done something difficult the first time, it should become easier. You're more informed about it. But very, very tricky for a student, Ken.
It is. And I guess, I enjoy having a rule set for tricky situations. And there is a very clear boundaried rule set. It's around our boundaries and our ethics. It is never appropriate for a therapist to reciprocate or act on erotic transference. Never. So that is a real hard and fast rule that we can rest in. At least we know that. It may be tricky, but we have got that boundary. And the ethical frameworks look to your ethical body, and it will undoubtedly emphasize maintaining clear professional boundaries to protect both the client and the therapist. Those boundaries are put in right at the beginning of the relationship, and they're there to help you, and they're there to help the client as well. And supervision, as you've said, Rory, it's the place to go. And you take your own reactions, which is what I was taking in to supervision. Remember, I was going in saying, I had this client, and this client presented in this way. And before my supervisor said, oh, this is what you need to do with your client, and have you tried this with your client? My supervisor didn't say that. My supervisor said, and what came up in you? And explored what was happening within me. And of course, we train supervision in Counselling Tutor. Rory and I are both supervisors, and we know that countertransference is what may play out there, and that's what the supervisor is looking for. So the supervisor will look to you and how that made you feel, but also maybe help you around how you may manage that with your client. There's a super duper handout for this as well, isn't there, Rory? And I think that you should grab it, because it is a topic that is worth delving into. And it is made by Rory's super duper handmade handouts. It is the erotic transference, working with that, and you can get that again by going to episode 355 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Click on the podcast episode. Go to Counselling Tutor. Sorry, I'm going too fast. Go to counsellingtutor.com. Click on podcast. Go to episode 355, and all the handouts and downloads and notes about what we've spoken about today, right there on that page. And that brings us to the end of our student services and to the end of episode 355 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Well, it's been quite a journey today. We started off with an ethical imperative, the importance of a clinical will. And if you're still with us, don't forget to go to episode 355, Counselling Tutor. Go to Counselling Tutor go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, find episode 355. You find the handout links there that are going to be very, very helpful for you. And we talked about, in the 21st century, as a 21st century therapist, you're going to have a clinical will. In Practice Matters, we talked to Ona Clark, a very principled and caring person who talked honestly and openly about the cost of caring. And then into Student Services, we talked about client desire, therapy's boundaries, and erotic transference. I explored an open and honest conversation about a time when clients may come for something other than therapy. In other words, coming to see you because they're attracted to you. And I'd like to thank everybody who listens, downloads, subscribes, shares. It means the world to me and Ken. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.